welcome everyone to our roundtable concerning the situation of women and children in the Middle East in turbulent times. My name is Lee. I was asked to be the chair instead of Mariana, which is very sorry. She cannot be here today due to personal issues. Indeed, turbulent times. So I thought that we might start with a little overview about this roundtable and what we want to do here today. So just let me know if you can see my PowerPoint right now. Yeah?
Yes, we can see it.
Great.
Yeah.
So today, as you know, we are talking about the challenges and opportunities for women and children in turbulent context in the Middle East as part of the 10th EURASIAN Peace Conference. You're welcome to be here. I thought that we might start with this overview. As you know, for 2 years already, we're experiencing this pandemic all over the world, and some areas are more troubled than others because of many reasons. They might have prior conflicts in the regions. They might have inequality between the genders, and the Middle East does not escape this situation, of course. And the aim of this roundtable is to show how the pandemic has increased the risk for the most vulnerable groups, among them, of course, women and children. We actually seek to highlight the challenges for the region and the possible solutions maybe for those challenges. And before we start with our speakers, I just wanted to show you a short video about the situation of women during the pandemic all around the world before we move and delve into the Middle East. So I hope you can hear it as well. Women all around the world, and now we'll move to another very short video about children in the Middle East. We can see here children in Syria during an NGO's activity to raise awareness to COVID-19. So now they're actually practicing social distancing. You can see them here drawing the coronavirus over their bombed houses. And we can all understand that the situation is not easy for them. Sanitize their hands. And that's basically it. So today with us, we're honored to have Professor José Ignacio Teruel from Congreso University, Argentina, and Miss María Clara Ralo Venditti from the same university in Argentina. We were supposed to have here with us today Dr. Sarai Aharoni from Ben-Gurion University, Israel, and the Dean of International Relations at Congreso University, Mariana Covolo. but due to personal issues, the last minute, they noticed us that they won't be able to be here. So now, of course, they're sorry for it. So now I will present Professor Teruel and Miss Venditti with the questions that Mariana Covolo wrote. She was supposed to be the chair instead of me. So the first question actually is, how did the pandemic affect the rights of children and women in the Middle East? So maybe we'll hear Professor Teruel first and then Ms. Venditti.
Okay, first of all, it's important to highlight that all my research is based in Saudi Arabia. Therefore, my focus in the answers will be in the country. Now, answering the question, according to International Amnesty, repression in Saudi Arabia decreased in 2020 as a strategy to get support of international community trying to change the reputation of the kingdom, while Riyadh was hosting the G20 forum. In effect, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, needs international support and investment to achieve Vision 2030 objective of reducing dependence on hydrocarbon and promoting tourism. In order to get it, he projects himself as a reformist leader who will modernize the kingdom. However, the situation changed as soon as the presidential term ended. In the first 6 months of 2021, the kingdom applied the death penalty to 40 people, even more than in all 2021. 27 people died for this cause. In addition, by August 2021, at least 39 activists, human rights workers, and government critics were in jail. Many women, as Nasima Al-Sada, Samar Badawi, and Lujain Al-Hatul, were set free thanks to international pressure, but they were forbidden to travel abroad and they can be arrested at any time as their sentences were not overturned. We must say the government represses any opposition that dares to challenge its authority, accusing it of treason to the country and terrorism. Among those who have been repressed, there are activists, businessmen, journalists, members of the Shia minority, independent clerics, academics, relatives of critics of the government, and members of the royal family. In the specific case of women, we must say feminism is forbidden in the kingdom, since it's considered an extremist ideology. This causes a duality of discourse. On the one hand, the government boasts of giving rights to women, but on the other, it persecutes feminist activists for their ideology. The main reason is that the crown wants to appropriate the protagonism in the achievement of social rights and thus eliminate from the official narrative the work of activists. Currently, the COVID-19 pandemic gives the government a new reason to oppress and to control the opposition. The attention of authorities is more focused now on social media, as many criticisms to the government are expressed there. On the other hand, according to the Freedom House organization, Saudi Arabia is one of the most repressive countries outside its borders. To this end, the crown cooperates with many other countries, like other Gulf monarchies. They have helped Saudi government in at least 3 of the 10 reported illegal deportation of its citizens, including deportation of activist Lujain Al-Hatul by the United Arab Emirates in 2018. With the world occupied with COVID-19, Saudi oppression continue mostly at home. In 2020 and 2021, Saudi Crown continued to detain peaceful activists who called for a change, describing them as traitors, agents of foreign governments, or immoral women who don't respect Saudi values and traditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Teruel. And now, Ms. Venditti.
Well, related to this topic, it is a fact that some governments have taken restrictive measures, not only for the epidemiological situation, but also to take advantage of the context. And in my research, I will talk about refugees, so to restrict the flows of refugees and asylum seekers in their countries. A refugee is categorized as a vulnerable person, especially if the refugee are women or children. And it is a fact that women and children are half of the refugee population. The refugee situation, especially the women and children who are refugees, have been seriously affected by government restrictions. Those restrictions have been justified by the excuse of COVID-19 pandemic, which has encouraged governments to increase border controls, closures, deny access to asylum, and shortcut the aid given to refugees. For instance, a combination of visa controls and career sanctions has proved incredibly effective in preventing asylum seekers from traveling by plane. For example, we have the case of Greece, which since the beginning of the refugee crisis in Europe and the closure of the Balkan route in 2016, has been the front row to the Middle East refugees in Europe. At the end of 2020, Greece was the home of more than 100,000 refugees and asylum seekers from the Middle East region. The Greek government campaign for COVID, Stay Home in order to stay safe, launched at March 2020, was illogical. All the refugees, no matter where they live, undergo harsh living conditions. For example, if we consider the living situations in refugee camps that have serious problems of overcrowding, the camp cannot provide the minimum requirements of social distancing and hand washing. The first COVID-19 lockdown in Greece started for all citizens on March 23rd and ended for Greek citizens on May the 4th. Schools reopened on June the 1st, and the country reopened its borders on June 15th, 2020. But it was not the same for refugees in Greece, who were at quarantine until August 31st, 2020, almost 2 months after the lockdown ended for citizens. The political decisions of the Greek government have risked the lives and well-being of the refugee population, especially women and children, since they are at the risk of gender-based violence or intrafamily violence. Reports show that during the lockdown in the Moria camp on Lesbos, incidences on sexual assault and gender-based violence increased while services available to refugees were restricted. The refugees in Moria camp had not had access to psychological and psychosocial support, a tool that it is necessary to go through in these situations, besides the fact of violent situations to women and children. And the measure is completely xenophobic and racist, and their arguments are against the refugees' rights. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic has served to institutionalize the reject of asylum procedures, not only in Greece, but in all the European Union, as a consequence of their new pact on migration, launched at September 2020, which allows the member states to deny refugee asylum procedures due to a crisis situation, similar to COVID. This new pact on migration is against the Refugee Convention of 1951 and contributes to the securitization vision that the European Union has, especially with external borders and with Middle East refugees. Finally, it seems that COVID is being used by states as a pretext for evading their responsibilities towards refugees under international law and for introducing even more restrictive policies that may well become permanent once the pandemic is over. Greece does not escape that, and it is the clear example on how the securitization vision on migration completely does not contribute to attenuate the refugee fear of persecution that made them ask for asylum. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we had two interesting angles, one from Saudi Arabia and the second one from Greece. The first focused on many vulnerable groups, among them women in particular, and the second focused on immigrants and refugees with a special focus on children and women. And of course that for refugees, everything's supposed to be harder, unfortunately, and that they suffer a lot, as we could see in the short video earlier from Syria. So I think that we got this kind of sense of what is going on in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe, maybe in regard to in relation to women and children. Maybe Anna and I could speak about Israel a little. So I'll just say this is not my research area, but from my experience during the time being of this last 2 years, the domestic violence is rising against women especially. But we also see a lot of awareness to this problem. I mean, lots of women fight this violence, and lots of other women, support their sisters that suffer from domestic violence. And I think that this is one of the problems that I guess that many countries suffer from these days, when everybody is isolated at their homes, but we experience it in Israel as well. So now, if the audience wants to open cameras, I think we will appreciate that. So we will know that you are here with us, of course, only if possible. There are some more questions from Mariana that we could think about or answer on, for example, how do you think that the pandemic has modified the migratory flow in the countries of the Middle East? One question. The second one is that lots of academics think that the pandemic has, in a way, served to restrict the freedom of expression and association with vulnerable groups such as women and children. Do you agree with that or not? And the last one is, what are the challenges that are facing the region after 2 years of pandemic? If anyone wants to jump in and answer, or to give us more background about that, so please feel welcome, and of course our main speakers. Okay. Anna, maybe?
Okay, just one word. I know this is not, I'm still a BA student and I'm not in depth in research about this, but there is something that I would like to say about the third question. There is a common thought among academics that the pandemic has in a way served to restrict the freedom of expression and association of vulnerable groups. I agree with the statement in that I believe that democracy is best expressed in ways of demonstrations against governmental decisions. And even in South Korea, which is my home country, I've experienced that the government is surely restricting demonstrations against their own governmental decisions, just by giving the excuse of we are not allowed to gather up more than 15 people at once. Okay, so I agree with this, and I believe that this certainly has affected the vulnerable groups that are unable to express their voices out to the government, except for demonstrations and those kind of gatherings. So
only imagine what happens in states that are not democratic.
yes. So what I wanted to say was that it even happened in democratic state, like in a fairly democratic state of South Korea. So what would have happened to other states, such as that are considered non-democratic? I mean, COVID-19 stopped everything, but it's especially stopped from people from being able to voice themselves. I can also associate this with the Arab Spring that I'm studying of. According to the professor that taught me, he told us that there has been kind of, again, a little spark of Arab Spring going on especially in, if I'm not wrong, it was Iraq. But it all stopped because of the COVID-19 and due to governmental restrictions in gathering together and organizing demonstrations. So I know this was irrelevant to women and children, but I believe that this could be in a broader scale associated to vulnerable groups such as women and children.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna, for bringing this angle in. Maybe our speakers from Latin America wants to say something about their continent and the situation there of women and children. Okay, Clara, go on, and then Professor Teruel.
Well, in our experience as Argentinians, we suffered like a very long quarantine. It was one of the longest ones, sorry. And the restrictions not only were really not effective, but also were prolonged in a long time. So we stepped. There was like a common thought of giving up after a couple of months, after we realized that the virus was not that much violent as we thought at the first beginning of the pandemic. In Latin America, especially, there have been some protests and movements against COVID, but I personally think that, for example, the anti-vaccines movement is not that big than in other continents as Europe, for example. I don't know if Ignacio wants to add something, and sorry for my pronunciation.
Thanks, Clara. Okay, what I think about this is that repression always exists, but the pandemic gave the reason to use it. And I think it's really helpful really helpful tool for governments because, for example, you can be oppressed feeling that someone is taking care of you when really is oppressing you. So you say, yeah, it's what happened in Argentina, and we say that, yeah, they are taking care of us, but they weren't really taking care of us. We were locked up during I don't know, they were like 8 months, and it was the restrictions were hard, really hard. So and there were a lot of people that supported these measures.
Yeah. So if the restrictions are hard for all of the society, so we can only imagine how bad women and children and vulnerable groups are experiencing this very harsh experience. And okay, so if we move back to the Middle East, and maybe we could now move towards an open discussion with our audience. So I wrote here some points that can make us think of the situation of women and children in the Middle East, especially. So everyone is welcome to relate to some of them or one of them, and to say things about it. So one issue is actually women in the job market. So as we all know, women have been severely affected in relations to their jobs, because they need to stay at home, because they need to take care of their children, for example, and this is only in Western societies, or not only in Western societies, but in societies that women go out to work. So just one thought that I had is how bad they have been affected in societies that are not necessarily send them to work outside of home. And another issue is the accessibility to health services. For me, although I live in a Middle Eastern country, I have very good health services. And if I'm sick, I can just approach the nearest doctor and to be given with the advices. And many children and women around the region, I'm not sure that this is the situation. So we could think of it as a challenge or as an opportunity. When we look forward, we could think about religion versus science. Does it have to affect the situation of women and children in the Middle East or in other regions in the world? We could think of domestic violence or fighting against domestic violence, the same thing that we saw here in Israel. We could think of mental health concerns, which is something that people start to talk about more and more, I guess all around the globe. But what does it do for women and children that are more vulnerable to begin with? And another point is whether health considered a security issue at all. I mean, when we talk about international relations, we know that certain countries refer to several security issues as security issues, and then offer a special treatment to cure these issues. But when we think about health, is it considered a security issue? And if it's not, so what is the proper treatment for that? When I think from a governmental point of view. And the last point that I was thinking about is whether the Middle East is unique in its problem or not. Maybe a global pandemic. In a global pandemic, we should look about the global world, and regions does not have to play a crucial role here in the pandemic. So if anybody from the audience or our speakers wants to relate to these points, so please feel free to jump in.
Well, if you allow me, I think that the challenges or opportunities are the ones you quote, but there are other challenges, specifically for refugees and women and children. The global trends on the last couple of decades had shown on the refugee population worldwide an increasement, especially in the Middle East. The conflicts and humanitarian crises inside the region have impacted not only the states in crisis, but also in the whole region and the world. The consequences have moved the political, economical, and social dynamics in the Middle East, and refugees have sometimes unbalanced, fragile states, especially in the region, generating waves of racism and xenophobia or conflicts between cultures. For example, in Jordan, 87% of Jordanians believe that there are too many refugees in their countries, considering that a third of the population of Jordan are refugees. And 64% of Jordanians believe that Jordan should focus on helping Jordanians, not refugees. I consider that another challenge is the geopolitical tensions that Middle East refugees phenomenon generates. The COVID-19 situation has provoked geopolitical disruption or has encouraged new geopolitical disruption, especially between Turkey and the European Union. In February 2020, Turkey opened its land border and encouraged refugees to cross to Greece. And Greece and Turkey had some discussions about the refugees who were crossing the land, the border, and when the refugees stopped at the border, the Greek police stopped them. So non-governmental organizations and human rights organizations accused Greece of using the new crisis at the borders to openly break its own asylum laws. Also, the European Union, as I said before, had a new migration agreement, which is much more restrictive than the older one. Another challenge is the poverty among refugees, especially women and children. And after the coronavirus breakdown, it has shown an increase, deteriorating not only the actual living conditions, but also the future of the next generations. For example, according to the World Bank, 1 million Syrian refugees have been newly affected by poverty after the beginning of COVID-19 crisis. And for instance, 56% of Syrian refugees in Lebanon have been pushed to poverty due to economic crisis that Lebanon has been facing in the last couple of years. In a post-COVID world, or nowadays, we can say that refugees have deepened their living situations, having serious consequences in women and children. As you said before, the risk of gender-based violence is a serious topic. And in humanitarian context, it's around 70% compared with 35% worldwide. So women and girls are at a real risk, especially if governments have no intention of relieve the situation, as we can see on the Middle East governments. Another, yes.
No, sorry, please continue.
Okay, thank you. Another challenge is that the conflict in the region remains a major driver of humanitarian need in the Middle East. In 2022, there will be around 19.9 million displaced people and refugees in the region. And also, statistics argue that climate refugees would be a major concern for Middle East, where women and girls are disproportionately impacted by climate shocks. So we are not only having refugees due to the conflict situation, but also there will be new waves of climate refugees who are a major concern. Nowadays, Middle East governments have not been the most concerned about climate change, but it is a fact that desertification and water scarcity have several impacts on migratory flows. And it is important to remark that women and girls are often underrepresented in decision-making process on climate action, and the consequences could intensify their vulnerability and the risk of gender-based violence, among other things. Finally, I think that a real good opportunity is to extend the study in this topic in refugees, women and girls, because the lack of information couldn't provide us tools to analyze the situation. It is a fact that refugees are understudied, especially if there are women and children, but to find real solutions, we need investigation related to this phenomenon. I think that I must say that neither women nor children are passive actors of their lives, as we can see it from outside the problem. Their presence on this topic has been growing up on the last couple of years, and they are half of the refugee population. So we must take actions and initiatives in order to discover new dimensions of this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara, very much. And I think that from the first part of your remarks, we could understand that there is a certain significance, at least to the region that we are talking about, whether it's the Middle East or other regions around the world. And of course, a certain importance or a lot of importance to the activities of governments in relation to the situation of refugees, and among them women and children, and even women and children that are not part of the refugees population. Professor Teruel, you wanted to say something before?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I think that today we are speaking about vulnerable groups such as children and women, but sometimes these categories mix with other categories. For example, maybe I am children, and also I am an immigrant, and this make me even more vulnerable. For example, in the specific case of Saudi Arabia, from March 2020 onwards, thousands of Ethiopian migrants, including pregnant women and children, were arbitrarily detained in at least five detention centers across the country. In them, you could find adults, teenagers, infants, and newborn babies who were locked up in the same dire conditions. Immigrants couldn't go outside, and they denounced that the jails or those centers were overcrowded, and they lack for specific needs, like, for example, water, food, clothes, healthcare, and sanitation. And in this specific case of Ethiopians, 7 people died because of that, of this, and not only women, but also men. So I think we could analyze this topic from different point of view and perspectives, and we will get really interesting results about it.
Thank you, Professor Teruel. Does anyone from the audience want to jump in and say something?
I would like to say something regarding the last sentence. Is the Middle East unique in its problems? I don't think the Middle East is unique regarding the challenges listed above, but it does have a more extreme. It's more extreme in its extent. Also regarding the domestic violence, already women and children are at the weak side within the family. They are considered more vulnerable to domestic violence. And I heard that due to COVID-19 and due to the lockdown caused people to stay more within their houses, such frustration of unable to go outside caused people to generate more domestic violence within their family, and especially towards children and women. So I think this is one challenge that people should have considered before putting into lockdown. But after several news of domestic violence being revealed, I believe it was a little bit too late, and people couldn't think of it before. So maybe if there would be another pandemic, I believe that this would be one of the challenges that should be dealt with before considering a lockdown to any of the countries.
Thank you, Anna. Could you elaborate maybe about your first point regarding the Middle East? You claim that it's not unique in its problems.
Yes, domestic violence also has been, sorry that I'm turning to Korea all the time, but I've been hearing Korean news that domestic violence did indeed increase, either in a bigger scale or a smaller scale. It did increase in number, even in South Korea. So I believe this isn't unique to the Middle East, because we all experienced lockdown together. But it does happen more extreme in Middle East, because I believe also because women are less participating in the job market in the Middle East than South Korea where I lived. So in the Middle East, it's more extreme, but it is a global trend regarding domestic violence.
Thank you. And maybe it's more extreme due to the many conflicts that are going on regardless of the pandemic in this particular region, because we all know that when people tend to be more in a more violent environment, so it affects domestic violence as well, unfortunately. And under severe stress and inconvenient circumstances, everything is worse. Anybody else from the crowd that wants to jump in, maybe to relate to one of the points here or to other points? Okay. So Professor Teruel and Ms. Venditti, do you want to add something before we close up this session?
I want to ask you if we are gonna talk about the health issue in another opportunity, or I can talk it about health now.
Of course, you can start.
I think that health, it is a security issue at all, but it is also one of the most affected human rights, especially in groups such as refugees. The access to health had, the shortcut in the access to health had a huge impact on refugees, because before the pandemic, they rely on private services. And when COVID-19 breakdown started, they couldn't afford that, so their vulnerability has grown. We also need to think about the language barriers. There are a great impediment in increasing the knowledge about the risk and cares regards COVID and to access to health aid. Besides that, COVID-19 prevention could not be approached inside a refugee camp when we know that overcrowding is the main characteristic. For example, during the lockdown, Syrian refugee girls and women complained about the lack of access to menstrual supplies or hygiene pads, as you showed in the video at the beginning of the discussion. Since their families could not afford them and the humanitarian aid was shortcut due to the flight and travel restrictions. And I think that we must talk about vaccination plans. It is a fact that to prevent COVID, the vaccine plays a key role, especially to reduce the risk of life. In the case of Middle East, all the countries have included refugees in their vaccination plans. Countries such as Jordan have made efforts to integrate migrants, refugees, and internally displaced people in their plans, and Lebanon has even held target vaccine drives. But however, there are other governments that put refugees on a second priority. For example, the government spokesperson from Greece, Aristotela Peloni, said, and let me quote, please, that for vaccination, there is a provision for migrant inoculations to take place, but they are not the priority to the government. So we can see how it changed according to the country and in the region. And for example, we must argue that in Jordan, if they are not vaccinating refugees, perhaps they could not end the pandemic situation, because refugees are a third of their population. And in Lebanon, there is the first country that has more refugees per capita in the world. So including refugees and migrants in their vaccination plans, it is an important effort to end the situation and move forward and solution and other challenges that these countries have. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as we can see, the gaps between groups and societies and groups inside the society in a certain state or in a certain region are growing, and of course health is something which more people can allow themselves if they have money. And if they have less money, and if they have less infrastructure, and if they have less accessibility to health services, so they will suffer more. Does anyone have something to add to any of these points, or maybe additional remarks from you, Professor Teruel?
Well, I would like to speak about immigrants, workers, and the pandemic in Saudi Arabia. I'm not talking about specifically children or women and the pandemic in this case, because it's a problem that all immigrants suffer in Saudi Arabia. In this country, we have 10 million immigrants workers who work under a sponsorship system called kafala, for which they suffer from exploitation and labor abuse, as they are prohibited from changing jobs or leaving the country without the permission of the employers. Leaving the workplace without the permission is an offense that results in the termination of the worker's legal status and potentially imprisonment or deportation, even if the worker is fleeing abuse. Because this system falls under the jurisdiction of interior ministries rather than labor ministries, workers have no protection under the host country labor law. This leaves them in a vulnerable situation, and they suffer exploitation, and they are denied such rights as the ability to enter a labor dispute process or join a union. And we can see that during the COVID-19 pandemic, this situation, alongside other factors such as limited access to healthcare and treatment, scarce legal protection, and dire living condition, put migrants workers in an even more vulnerable situation and at a higher risk from COVID-19. So it's not just only between women and children, but also it's a common problem. It's a big problem that all migrant workers suffer in the country.
Thank you, Professor Teruel. I see here in the audience Professor Galia Preste-Bernathan, who is the director of the Leonard Davis Institute. Do you want to add something or ask something?
Hi, first, I really apologize that I missed most of the interesting discussion as I was teaching Introduction to International Relations. So, but I did want to ask, what I heard was really interesting, and I have two questions. One, do you know at all, I know this is a roundtable on the Middle East, but when Ignacio, what you were saying about, the really dire situation of, workers, foreign workers in Saudi Arabia, do you know what the situation is in other parts of the world where you have like a large, work migrants around? I mean, these are the, even in Western Europe, I don't know what's happening in Latin America, for example, South America. Is this something unique, you think, the Saudi case, or non-democratic states, or do you have a global perspective on how bad the situation is? And the second question is, and maybe you discussed this at the beginning, and I apologize, and then just ignore me. I'm just curious about your studying these issues from Argentina. Studying the Middle East, since I can't resist the temptation of a global conference, and sort of see what brought you to this, and how easy or difficult it is to study this region from the Southern Cone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I must say that it's really difficult to study the Middle East from Argentina. It's really, really difficult because sometimes we try to get support, but we don't. And there are not many centers to study this problem. And sometimes we have many problems with the language. For example, I think that's my personal opinion. I think that sometimes it's really useful, or the most of the times it's really useful to speak Arab to understand some problems, and we don't. For example, I don't, and it's difficult to get support from institutions or from other kind of specialists that helps you to understand some matters. I started studying Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago, and I started studying the Vision 2030, and then I don't know, I like it and I kept on that, but it's been really difficult, and sometimes you can see there is no much interest around people. So you say, yeah, I study Saudi Arabia, and they say, why do you do that? What, why I don't, they don't get why you could, well, why do you study the country so far away? And sometimes it's hard to explain them how connected I think it's the world. And for example, now that we are president of the Human Rights Council of United Nations, I say, oh yeah, that's why I study Saudi Arabia. We can discuss this country in national institutions, but I think it's necessary, and I'm really critical about the position that Argentina has had when we speak about human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. And I forgot the first question, sorry.
It was specifically about you don't have to answer that, whether, the issue of COVID and its impact on workers, foreign work migrants in other parts of the world that you may know of. Yeah.
Okay, that's something I don't know. I'm not specialized on this specific topic, but I think Clara may know about this.
Hi. Related to migrant workers, we in Latin America, we can talk about, for example, the border with Mexico and United States, which has been compromised due to the COVID-19 situation. And also, I can talk for my personal experience as a volunteer of a migrant organization. And there have been some irregular entrances to Argentina by irregular migrants that showed the fragile borders that as Argentina we have, and the vulnerability of this group. In Mendoza, the province where we live, a couple of months ago, some migrant worker from Bolivia was attacked by a ruler, a camp machine, like a work machine. And that evidence the problem we have related to work migrants in Mendoza, the xenophobia and racism that we express in this situation. We also could work about the care work that migrant workers do here in Argentina, the paid care work, like as I don't know, caregivers or I think you understand. And we must say that Argentina has a high percentage of informal labor market, which risk the fear of detention of migrants because they don't have the papers or the regularization, the migrant regularization to work in formal industries here in Argentina. The Argentina law of migration is a law based on a human rights approach, on the contrary of the world vision of migration nowadays. But the regularization of this law, it is not effective. And I think that we must take action to provide migrants those services. And based on the second question you asked, in my personal opinion, Middle East is a region that has much to offer, especially if we are studying international relations. Perhaps it is not the region where most economic flows happen, or where all the or the most important region for globalization, but it is a region where we can see how the world dynamics impact on states. My main topic nowadays is refugees and migrants, and Middle East has much to offer in this topic. And I think that the migratory flows and the refugee flows are perhaps the same as as worldwide, but in Middle East we can see how those flows are deteriorated or exacerbated, or how human rights are often at risk, especially in refugees and children, in refugee situation. Well, I think that's all.
Thank you. Thanks.
So
Bye.